You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening.
Okay, I think I'm gonna start. So this area within the deer fencing here was created under a woodland creation scheme with a lot of help from the Woodland Trust.
Hello everyone and welcome to this bonus episode of Meet the Farmers, which is all about agroforestry. And this is because last Thursday I went along to the very first agroforestry show at Helen Browning's farm in Wiltshire. The show was organised by the Soil Association and the Woodland Trust and brought together farmers, foresters, tree surgeons, growers, graziers, advisors, funders and food businesses to discuss all things to do with agroforestry. But how far is it from becoming mainstream, and what are some of the key barriers that is holding its development back? I went to the show with these questions in mind. First, though, I wanted to find out how the show came about in the first place. I spoke to Ben Raskin, Head of Horticulture and Agroforestry at the Soil Association. Ben also manages the agroforestry at Helen Browning's farm.
In 2017, the Woodland Trust and the Royal Forestry Society and the Soil Association ran a agroforestry conference, which was, obviously not the first agroforestry event, but it was, I think, the first sort of big, not purely academic agroforestry conference. And we sold out with 250 people, and it was really exciting. And sort of after it, Helen Cheshire at the Woodland Trust and myself, who sort of had been driving that, we thought, well, what next? There's got to be another one. And every year we said, well, should we do something this year? And it was sort of the policy landscape wasn't right for quite a while. The policy session actually at the show, was great. All four nations agreeing that agroforestry was a good tool and agreeing that it needed to be supported and people needed the help, particularly with sort of good quality advice. We no longer have to argue as to why agroforestry is good. Now we just need to work out how to do it. And it just felt, when Helen and I were talking last year, Helen Cheshire and I were talking last year, it just felt that actually now is the time. There's enough farmers wanting it. There's been a real, we can't keep up with the demand for people wanting help and support with agroforestry. So Helen and I basically sort of kicked the ball into the arena and luckily we got some early support from sponsors, which made a huge difference to giving the two organisations the sort of confidence to do it. We wanted to cater for everybody because we know that there are a relatively small but significant number of farmers that are actually quite a long way along this journey already. Some of them have been planting it, but some of them have been learning a lot and are kind of in a way really kind of almost there. But we're also aware there's a lot of people that have only just started to hear about this and really want to, just absorbing everything they can. And we've, certainly had feedback from the show that there's quite a lot of people in that camp. We want it to be practical. It's definitely for farmers primarily. Having said that, we're also really pleased to have researchers and policy makers and advisors. We've had farm walks, we've had practical demos, and the type of questions on the farm walks have been, when do you prune this? How do we plant this? What's the depth of mulch? What's the time? It's really quite practical, technical skills.
We've just been on a farm walk at Helen's wonderful farm here, and you have integrated agroforestry techniques in a number of different ways on the farm. Can you just run us through some of those?
Yeah, so we're trying to be very experimental. What I love is it's a mix of we'll do anything, but we have to have a sound commercial rationale behind it. So we want to try different techniques. The bit we're on is all silvo-pastoral. Most of this bit of the farm is not cropped, so there's lots of cropping up on the higher bits of ground. It's a combination of things like alley crops. So we've got Perry pears, for instance. And sea buckthorn and willow and alder grown in single rows in alleys with rotational grazing blocks in between, and that's on quite a big scale, similar spacing to Stephen Briggs's. We sort of inspired by that. We've got browsing blocks, which are really tightly packed plantings of willow and poplar, and the idea there is that you bring the livestock in to effectively coppice the trees for you, and then bring them out again quickly before they totally destroy them. So our sort of experimental fruit and nut field, which we hope will be a civil poultry system at some point, so we'd love to have birds in there. But at the moment we cut for hay and silage, so we're still getting productivity from that. And then we've got an area that will be a grazed woodland. So at the moment it's deer fenced off and establishing, but the idea with that is we'll have something like 60-70% tree cover, but with lots of sort of pockets of grass in between. Oh, and then the field we're in, actually, which I sort of forget is also agroforestry, which is more of a parkland setting. So there are 2 big oak trees in this field, and we're trying to sort of build the succession of that. And we're trialling a roundel system of planting, which is inspired by Mark Franklin at the Woodland Trust, where you've got your central trees that will be your final big trees there in the centre, and then you have circles of nurse trees, effectively, things like birch, nitrogen-fixing, browse trees, thorn trees that will protect this.
Like regenerative agriculture, agroforestry could be said to be a broad umbrella, which, put simply, involves combining agriculture and trees in some way. It does seem that an increasing number of farmers are interested in the concept, especially as we face increasingly uncertain temperatures and rainfall, and this was evident by the number of people attending the show. Trees bring with them the benefits of shade provision, temperature regulation, and drainage, amongst other things. There remains a lot to learn. I asked Helen Browning, Chief Executive of the Soil Association and farmer, host of the Agroforestry Show, what she has learned from the agroforestry experiments on her farm so far.
I'm Helen Browning and I'm Chief Executive of the Soil Association. I think I've learned a lot over the last 10 years about trees, full stop. You know, they just don't teach us about trees in farmer school. And so I think a lot of farmers come up, being slightly embarrassed about how little we know about these things that are, in our hedges and woods. I'm starting to look at trees very differently, starting to understand how to grow a tree that if you're going to eventually want to produce quality timber for that, what are you looking for? How are you going to help that tree to thrive? If you're looking for fruit, how are you going to help that happen too? So I think I've learnt a lot, and I think we've learnt a lot about just some of the technical details of growing trees. How important it is to get the establishment phase right, just like growing an animal. Actually it's so important. The pregnancy and the early few days of life are crucial to the whole health of that animal for the rest of its life. And it's the same with trees. If we plant them right and we get their mulching right and we really give them that good start, it saves you loads of time and effort further down the line. So that early investment in trees is very similar to the early investment in animals that we make. And how to do that, the importance of mulching and getting the tree protection right. I'm still grappling with some of that, really. I think we've learned a lot of little technical things, or we feel like we have started to understand some of that a bit more. It's been a great joy, actually, seeing this 200-acre farm turn from a wet clay bowl of really difficult ground into something where there's a real shape and structure to it that the trees and the alley cropping and the new hedges and everything else have given. So there's a whole load of things that we've learnt and are still exploring as well.
With your farmer hat on, when you talk about agroforestry with other farmers, what reaction do you get, and what conversations have you been having, and how has that changed, I suppose, during the course of what you've been doing?
I think the enthusiasm for agroforestry, the interest in it, has really spiralled over the last 3 or 4 years. We found that whenever we have a farm walk here focused on that, that we get great attendance. I think the fact that we've had, I think 1,200 people on both days at the show from a standing start is testament to that too. So I think we're having the kind of conversations that perhaps seeing the interest that just wasn't there. I think the fact that DEFRA's taking more of an interest in agroforestry, and you've got various people now offering grants to help with the establishment. We hope we're going to get one within the SFI next year. All of these things are making people think, okay, now's the time to look at this properly. Let's learn about, what Helen and loads of other people have done and whether they've made their mistakes, and seeing if we can start to think about what this might mean on our farms.
The Agroforestry Show enabled, perhaps for the first time in this particular way, for farmers and foresters to come together to share skills and ideas. Forestry Commission was a key sponsor of the event, and I spoke to James Ramskir Gardiner, an agroforestry advisor with the Forestry Commission, to get his take on the state of agroforestry today and where it is heading.
I'm James Ramskir, Gardiner, and I'm the National Agroforestry Advisor for the Forestry Commission. So I see agroforestry as being in the kind of similar position that regen agriculture was about a decade ago, where you had a few really innovative farmers and land managers kind of diving headfirst into this new fangled way of managing the land, getting really quite excellent results, and then inspiring others to kind of take up that mantle. That's kind of position I see agroforestry in the moment. It's at the beginning of it hitting kind of mainstream agriculture, and it times really nicely with some of the grant schemes we've got coming out soon.
As Ben Raskin told me, one of the aims of the show organisers was to create an event that could be as practical and hands-on as possible, designed with practitioners and farmers in mind. I spoke to a number of people attending to find out what attracted them to the show, how they already use agroforestry, and what they might do differently having attended the show. Here's Rhodri Owen, who is Farm, Forest and Innovation Manager at a college near Carnarvon in North Wales.
My name's Rhodri Owen. I manage a college farm up in North West Wales near Carnarvon. It's quite a unique estate farm. It's got 400 acres of lowland pastures, and we grow a bit of crops. And then we've got 300 acres of woodland, which is quite not very common to have that balance on a farm, yeah. So we're down here in the Agroforestry Show to learn a bit more about agroforestry, bringing trees onto the farm and using trees for the resilience. We're looking at, like lambing paddocks maybe early on in the spring. If we could create microclimates and still produce grass, that's the cheapest feed we can put through our livestock. But obviously climate change, we're having dry seasons, we're having very rough springs. So, with lambing and stuff, trees maybe can play an important part in resilience.
Yeah. And are you coming here with quite an open mind for ideas, or are you coming with specific questions in mind?
Oh, no, we're down here for ideas. We've got head forest, one of the lecturers from forestry here, and myself here, and we're looking for ideas because within agroforestry there's not a lot out there, to be honest, and a lot of it is experimental work at the moment. The estate, we have a lot of trees on the estate already, but it's linked to parkland, and we have 7 kilometres of hedgerows that we put in the last 10-15 years. So now it's time to look at possibly bringing trees into high-intensity grazing areas. We've had some big success with the pigs. We've got a pig unit on the college farm as well. We've been putting dry sows into woodland for commercial purposes, really, for ground prep. So when we clear woodland, commercial forest, because we're in a low-lying area, the regen and the weeds are flying, So you could end up either using a lot of diesel or a lot of chemicals. So what we have is we will electric fence an area off, put dry sows there, and it works fantastic. The pigs absolutely love it. There's a feed cost saving because they'll live off that ground. But the critical thing is you need a head forester and the pigmen to be working together.
Connor Kendrew runs a market garden in Cornwall and is an advisor for Cornwall Wildlife Trust.
Trees as part of the farming system can bring in more ecological functions than pretty much any other single thing you would implement. So for me, I'd come in here and talking to people, and it's nice that we can come and scratch each other's backs, but also it's working out where we can find rooms for improvement in the ways that we design agroforestry systems, the species we select, how we finance it, and ultimately how that's going to help UK food production, but also nature in the UK, be better for a better future.
And you're a market gardener, so how do you see agroforestry fitting into that system?
Well, so we're using a 30-inch bed, and every 10 beds is a row of fruit trees. And then you may know that a lot of market gardeners use silage sheet in order to flip beds, to change beds over and suppress weed growth. Every time you put silage sheet on a piece of ground, you're creating a new roof. And so all of our beds are intersectioned with swales, which are ditches on contour. And those swales will have fruit trees planted all the way along them. And so we take all of that surface runoff, we put it back in the soil, and we have an agroforestry system literally drinking up that excess water. Trees are part of a design in any landscape. The UK climax is in a forest, so every agro-ecosystem we design should incorporate trees.
Okay, and are you principally interested in moisture then, or is this about multi-benefit?
Oh, it's about all of it, really. I think, any one thing that we can focus on, so water retention is one, but productivity, diversifying our diets, animal welfare. Yeah, it's all one and the same thing. What I'm interested in is an ecosystem scale response to the things that we do.
Meet the Farmers is brought to you by RuralPod Media, the only podcast production agency to specialise in the rural sector. We're on a mission to make rural stories mainstream and help businesses, organisations and communities like you tell your story through podcasting. Podcasting is a fantastic way of connecting with your audience, whoever that might be, getting your message out there and networking with leaders in your niche. RuralPod Media can help you by launching your new podcast or helping you with the technical side. We also provide podcast training and an audit service if you already have a podcast. You're not sure where to take it to next. For more information or to book a call, visit ruralpodmedia.co.uk. That's ruralpodmedia.co.uk. Liam Armstrong is a catchment-sensitive farming advisor with Natural England, based in Northumberland. I asked him why he was attending the show.
Agroforestry keeps sort of cropping up as a new way of doing old things, but I didn't really know sort of any more than that or the specifics. And there aren't very many opportunities to sort of see it in action that I've come across up in the northeast. So it's been a good thing to come down here and see it sort of working and at sort of the beginning stages of some of the trials and some that have been going on a little bit longer. And then all the various bits and pieces that come with it around AI and around dung beetles and all the sort of extra bits and pieces that aren't just trees in a field.
There seemed to be a strong feeling by a lot of people attending that support for and wider acceptance of agroforestry is long overdue, as Cornish farmer Chris Jones explained.
I'm Chris Jones and I'm from Woodland Valley Farm in Cornwall. I've been interested in agroforestry for many years. I learned about it first in the 80s when I was at Bangor University, and we've been developing some agroforestry areas on the farm, initially with a nut orchard and now with about 60 acres of silvopasture. I do think that agroforestry is long overdue as one of the suite of actions that can be grant funded by DEFRA, which will have really good long-term climate resilience, a little bit of carbon sequestration, lots to do with animal health and crop health, and just built-in landscape resilience.
One challenge often put to agroforestry proponents is the cost of establishment and the period of return of planting trees. Often the initial capital outlay is significant, which may lead farmers to question whether to allocate areas of their land to longer-term tree cover. The Agroforestry Handbook, compiled by the Soil Association, suggests that longer-term cash flow forecasts are created to account for these longer returns. For example, 5 years for apples, 12 years for poplars, and 50 years for walnuts. However, figures also should be put in the context of a whole farm budget approach, and thought should also be given to the broader, sometimes indirect benefits of agroforestry, such as shade and shelter provision. I put the point about establishment costs to Helen Browning. She suggested to start small and work up from there.
Yeah, I can understand the challenge. Actually, I think at the moment, if you can't get hold of a grant, and various people have come to me today saying, actually, we're already offering grants. You're in the National Forest, area zone, so you could now get a grant for this. And as I say, DEFRA might bring some through. But I would, if you can't get hold of a grant right now, which should help defray that nervousness, I would just start to think about what can I get a grant for. We know where we are getting hedges, shelter belts, all those kind of things starting to be encouraged and paid for. Have a go with some of that. Just get some trees planted, get your confidence up, start playing around, even with just a few trees, and start to learn and feel confident about establishment techniques and that kind of thing, so that when it's right for you, when the finances are right, you can get up and running reasonably quickly.
An aspect of agroforestry that was explored in some detail at the show was the role that it might be able to play in tackling the climate crisis. Will Simonson is principal researcher in agroforestry at the Organic Research Centre, and asked him what he had heard at the show in terms of how agroforestry can be designed with climate in mind.
My name is Will Simonson. I represent the Organic Research Centre. I think climate change has featured in pretty much every session that I've been to, actually, whether it's talking about sort of cropping with trees and the benefits of that, or with livestock systems, or the sort of economic side of things. There's kind of elephant in the room is climate change, which is not just something that in the future that we have to worry about. It's actually with us now, of course, and in a sense we're getting a little reminder with this fantastic hot weather that we're receiving, we're benefiting from now. For agroforestry to work as a climate change solution, nature-based solution it's sometimes called, in terms of mitigating climate change, in terms of adapting to it, for me, one of the key questions is, how can agroforestry be designed so in itself it's resilient? The trees are in the ground, that they're going to survive, they're going to flourish and produce those benefits down the line, because there's so much that's going on in terms of drought events in spring and summer, perhaps flooding, perhaps sort of increased disease risk that's spread by climate factors. There's a lot that could go wrong. So I think farmers need to be aware of that, not to be held back in going, giving it a go, but to do it in a really kind of thoughtful way, thinking about their farms, the site conditions, the areas that might be prone to late frost, for example, or to flooding, or waterlogged soils. Thinking about what tree species would do well in the future climates that's projected, all of that. So it's kind of really important thought process, and it's the one that we explored in the session that I chaired this morning. It's sort of, as I said, it's coming through in most of the sessions I've been at, really.
Agroforestry has the potential to bring farmers and foresters together to share knowledge and skills and break down perceived barriers between what is sometimes seen as separate disciplines that rarely come together. But how can this collaboration happen? Here's Ben Raskin from the Soil Association.
One of the things we've been delighted about this show is we've had foresters involved, and really good presence from foresters, because we know we can't, we know farmers don't have the skills. I'm from a horticultural background, I've grown fruit trees, but what do I know about timber, and for instance, in the Soil Association, my colleague Clive Thomas, who's a sort of my forestry equivalent, almost woodland equivalent, the way we've worked together and complemented each other's knowledge and skills has enabled us to do so much more, and that's what I'd love to see. There's opportunities, I think, for forestry contractors and businesses to manage agroforestry as well as to manage woodlands. Equally, there will be farmers who just want to do it themselves and be in control, and I think both works great. I think there's also real opportunity for new entrants in this, and particularly I would say on some of the higher value sort of fruit and nut stuff. A lot of farmers want trees but don't want to manage them, and then equally there's people like me who don't have their own land but want to work with trees. In a way, what better way to do it? And it's effectively that's what Helen's done, with me. I'm only doing half a day a week, but it's bringing in that sort of just another head that can sort of think about that stuff that the farmer might not either have the time or the inclination to do.
On his college farm in North Wales, Rhodri Owen has shown how a farming enterprise and a forestry enterprise can come together with direct collaboration and skill sharing between a pig farmer and a forester. He explained how this works in practice.
The pigman is off every other weekend, so the forester steps in and he has to feed the pigs and check the pigs. So there's a skill sharing there, because he needs to know what to look out for from a welfare point of view on those pigs. He needs to check the water, he needs to feed them, check the fence. So there's a skills thing that, where the pigman can help the forester, and the forester then can see what the benefits that the pigs do to the management of the forest. So there's a co-working going on there, but it's quite a unique situation, isn't it? Where absolutely. We've got a pig unit with a pigman, who's a very experienced pigman, and we've also got the forestry side. That wouldn't be necessarily on one farm, would it, out there? So you would need to link that, wouldn't you? You need to link a pig unit, maybe, that could benefit with getting sows out of the sheds. From these pig units out there, you need to link the forests with the pig units. Because there's a win-win there for both. The forestry side win on reducing chemical use, and then you got the labour cost of clearing and ground prepping for commercial forestry. So, and then the pigman gains from a point of view of, the welfare side and getting the pigs back into the system, and possibly in the future added value as well from the pork. Because we've come down here and we've listened to somebody in one seminar regarding cull ewe. And he was selling mutton and lamb down in London from sheep that were being grazed in woodlands. Well, the same thing could easily adapt to the pork sector.
For many attending the show and for proponents of the practice, agroforestry has multiple benefits, and the investment is, they would argue, wholly worthwhile. What might be holding farmers back from embracing agroforestry? What are the barriers? And Raskin.
Throughout all of this time that we've done various surveys, and I talk to farmers all the time, and the two biggest barriers are knowledge and money, and I guess that's not entirely surprising. If you look at the profitability of trees over 50 years or 100 years, there is no question that they will increase your financial productivity. The challenge is you have to spend all of the money up front to establish them. There's no question that's holding farmers back. I speak to a lot of farmers who go, I'm going to wait to see what money I've got to support, or I'd love to do this, but I can't afford to lose that ground from production for the first 10, 20 years. So I think, we're really hoping that these new SFI payments will help stimulate a bit. My instinct is they still won't be enough for some farmers. The grants are getting better, and potentially some of the carbon and biodiversity payments will help, although I think there's a lot of risk involved in that as well, and I'm not sure that's the answer. And then the knowledge and confidence is the other big one. We still don't have a lot of good economic case studies for the UK for particular crops. So, I can say with some confidence that for most livestock farmers, more trees is likely to improve the resilience and productivity. But if you say to me, should I plant this species with this animal or this species with this crop, do you have any evidence on it? I go, probably not. You've got to be confident. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to know that you're planting the right tree, and you've got to understand what that's going to deliver for you. And a lot of the early work we do with farmers supporting that decision making is around understanding objectives. I am not an expert in anything, but what I do understand is the things you need to consider, and I'm getting better at understanding, how you use that kind of objective setting process to narrow down your choice of tree. Because when you start, you go, let's plant some trees, and there's thousands of trees you could choose from, and all of them will deliver some benefit. So how do you choose what's the right one for you? And I think that's part of the challenge.
For James Ramskir, Gardiner at the Forestry Commission, one of the main barriers is related to mindset regarding the principle of trees on the farm.
So I think one of the main kind of barriers we've got is this kind of perceived mindset around trees on the farm. For 100 years now, the way we have been encouraged to farm and manage our land has been a lot of only doing one thing with the land. And now we're entering around where we realise we really need to be kind of stacking different options onto the land. So we can absolutely farm at the level of output we are currently, but by adding more trees into that system, not only to help improve the tree cover in the country, but to help just improve the farm business, making it more resilient, making a better financial return for the farmer by decreasing inputs and kind of costs such as that.
Knowledge transfer and skills is another potential barrier, explains Will Simonson at the Organic Research Centre.
This is something we explored as part of leading the DEFRA test and trial on agroforestry, which completed earlier on this summer, and it's kind of the barriers, the sort of challenges of uptake that we were exploring with clusters of farmers through sort of workshop settings. I think it's kind of that knowledge gap, because agroforestry at the end of the day, it is a more complex form of farming. You've got another layer of vegetation, if you like, and of different management of those perennial shrubs and trees which you're thinking about, as well as your existing cropping or grazing system, and the kind of the synchrony of that's important, the managing that in terms of your labour, any machinery needs. Farmers don't necessarily know masses about managing trees, so it's kind of, there is that sort of maybe important knowledge gap that prevents farmers wanting to experiment. Yeah, and I think that's being addressed. There's lots of different information sources out there. There's the Agroforestry Handbook that was published a few years ago. There's events like this that are becoming really important. There's the Agroforestry Open weekends, where farmers open their farm gates to the public and farmers to go and visit actual sites and to talk with farmers about the challenges that they face. We help to facilitate some of that at ORC, and I think farmers learn best from other farmers, so that's really key.
So, will agroforestry ever enter the mainstream in terms of farming practice? And if yes, how long will this take? This was my final question.
Yeah, I've been talking about that a bit with a few people, and there have been the early adopters, the pioneers, who have been creating these fantastic demonstration sites and building evidence about what works, what doesn't work. That's been really important. Kind of, there's a sense it might be plateauing a little bit because it's that mainstream that's really important. It's the whole conventional farming sector, if you like, and community, which probably aren't that well represented in a place like this. The show is maybe collecting the enthusiasts, really. So maybe some of the sceptics as well. But there's a whole sector out there who need convincing. Be interesting to see what the government support through ELM's Sustainable Farming Incentive is going to look like. There should be news on that imminently. Whether that could turn the tide a bit, yeah, we wait and see.
So I'd say we're probably about a decade away from agroforestry being mainstream. Similar to how regen agriculture was viewed 10 years ago is where we're at now. And now regen agriculture is really beginning to pick up pace. The difference, hopefully, with agroforestry in this country is that it's going to be funded and supported a lot more than regen agriculture was. So I would love to, a few more years, it'll be considered far more mainstream.
I think that with input prices going up, we need to look at opportunities to reduce other costs where we can. And I think breaking up larger fields and putting in trees, there may be an outlay expenditure at the beginning, but I think it's looking forward to future-proofing things and to offer livestock welfare benefits and potential income from timber and fruit trees and things like that. I think it's one of those where you might have to take a little financial hit now, but it'll be worth it in the long run. I think looking forward to the future is something that we probably have to do a bit more of.
I mean, I think to start with, we need to stop thinking of it a little bit as a separate discipline. Agroforestry is in a way is a title that maybe puts some people off because we all have trees on our farms. Even the most barren of our farms have some trees on them. And I think as we start to see things like climate change really taking hold, where we're getting these hotter, drier summers, these warmer, big deluges. Trees are the only thing that are going to save us on our farms. So I think it moves from being seen as maybe this is something a bit interesting that might have some biodiversity benefits, that might have some other income benefits, into something which actually feels quite fundamental for the resilience of our farming systems, particularly if we're in livestock. And I think farmers have always seen sort of trees as the enemy a bit, and they belong in woods and they sit over there, and then this is my farming and it's nice broad acre stuff. But I'm starting to really recognise that our animals aren't going to thrive in these temperatures if we don't have trees, and so they become a necessity, a real aid to our future. And if you're going to plant them, why not then start to think about planting them in a way that's going to also bring you or your children some real income at some point into the future. So I think our attitude as farmers, our attitude towards trees will shift very quickly as we start to realise that our cows aren't going to milk if it's too hot, our pigs aren't going to be very happy, our chickens aren't going to range, all of these kind of things. And even our cereals and our broadacre crops may really benefit from shade and some wind protection and that kind of thing in the future.
I find it really hard to answer this question. To me, it almost feels like it has. And yet I'm also aware that I tend to work with probably the 10% of the most progressive farmers. And so I have to remind myself to sort of step back and go, I know there are a lot of farmers that still just don't want any more trees anywhere near them. So I think no, it's not in the mainstream, clearly. But it is now... I think the beauty of it being an SFI, whether or not the payments are enough and whether or not suddenly everybody plants trees next year when they're released, if they're released, what it's done is it's embedded tree planting into farming language. And certainly that's, for us at the Soil Association, we're really trying to think about trees as, a whole farm tree plan. You talk about your lays or your crop, or your, whatever it is, we'll just include trees in that farm planning. It's not different. It's not woodland. I mean, it might be woodland, but it's not just woodland over there. Trees will provide potentially a benefit within any of that. And every field you look at, every bit of your farm, and then the wider landscape is like, well, let's think about trees. You may decide not to have trees. That's, obviously not suggesting planting trees everywhere, but having it in your mind that that's always an option. If I want shade for something, what about trees? If I want to put a barrier in, what about trees? It's that kind of thing.
that is it for today. Huge thanks to everybody who spoke to me at the show and to the show team, including the organisers at the Soil Association and Woodland Trust, for enabling me to record the event. Thank you very much for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. Leave us a review. And if you're a new listener, please go through the catalogue, through all the other episodes, and delve into any of those farming stories that we featured over time.